It was the kind of night that carved itself into memory, colder and harsher than anything the Montana foothills had seen in months. Wind whipped across the rocky clearing, shaking the scraggly pines and flattening the dry grass until it looked like waves on a stormy sea. The moon hung behind thick clouds, casting only the faintest silver glow over the land. That night, even the stars hid their faces. In the middle of that nowhere, chained to a splintered post by a length of rusted iron, stood a battered Mustang, his sides heaving, his coat matted and streaked with blood and mud. He was a ghost of what a wild horse should be. Ribs like fence posts, mane tangled and torn, and a haunted look in his big liquid eyes. His name, though no one there called it, was Dust. He stood trembling, every muscle locked between exhaustion and panic, the chill sinking all the way to his bones. The world was cruel here, but that night, fate seemed intent on pushing Dust past his limits. In the distance, a sharp sound crackled through the wind, a branch snapping, not by accident, but with the slow, purposeful tread of something large. The Mustang's ears shot forward. He lifted his head, nostrils flaring, and the heavy links of his chain rattled against the old post. A bear. Not just any bear, but a hungry grizzly, driven down from the high country by hunger and desperation, prowling the moonlit woods for anything that might fill its aching belly. The scent of horse sweat, blood, and fear was irresistible. Dust could hear it before he could see it. The snuffling breaths, the shuffle of massive paws through the brush. He pulled back, hard, yanking at the chain, but it bit deep into his neck, the pain sharp and immediate. There was no one for miles, no one at least who was meant to care. But pain, Dust knew, was old as the earth itself. Pain was what had driven him to the edge, his old herd lost in the roundups, his freedom stolen by rough hands and rougher voices. And then, after being used up and cast aside, this, abandoned in the wild, to face whatever came for him. The bear emerged, a mountain of muscle and fur, eyes glinting in the half-light. It rose on its hind legs, sniffed, and let out a sound that chilled the blood. Dust reared, striking out with his front hooves, the iron chain holding him just out of reach of escape. His heart hammered so hard he thought it would break through his ribs. The bear crept closer, slow, certain, as if it knew there would be no fight. Dust screamed, a raw, wild sound that tore through the clearing and vanished into the wind. And that, somehow, was what saved him. Not a mile away, a figure moved through the trees. Ethan Collins was used to being alone in the dark. After all, solitude was the only thing that ever listened to him these days. But tonight, his hike had stretched longer than he planned, and his only goal was to find the old logging trail and make camp before midnight. He was a big man, rough around the edges, with hands that looked like they'd seen their share of fire and pain. The cold barely bothered him. The loneliness, maybe, a little more. But when the scream came, raw and desperate, Ethan stopped dead. He listened, squinting through the gloom. There again. That was no wolf, no coyote. That was the scream of something in agony, something that still believed in hope, even if just for a second. He dropped his pack and took off toward the sound, heart pounding. As he drew closer, he saw it. The massive shape of the bear, the wild, panicked horse, the flash of chain in the moonlight. He acted without thinking. Years as a firefighter had taught him that hesitation was death. He yanked a flare from his belt, never hiked without one, and struck it. The sudden burst of red light filled the clearing, shadows leaping against the trees. "Hey, get out of here!" he roared, his voice carrying like thunder. The bear turned, startled by the light and the noise, and for a second, Ethan thought it would come for him. He planted his boots, refusing to show fear, and waved the flare higher. The bear hesitated, huffed, then dropped back on all fours and slunk away into the woods, defeated for now by a man with nothing left to lose. The adrenaline faded, and Ethan turned to the Mustang. Dust was still wild-eyed, his sides heaving. Ethan moved slowly, hands open, voice low and steady. "Easy, boy. I'm not going to hurt you. You're okay now, I promise." He saw the wounds, old scars, new cuts, blood crusted around the chain. Whoever left this horse here had meant for him not to be found. Rage twisted in Ethan's gut, but he shoved it down. Right now, it was about survival. His phone had no signal. Even if it did, there was no time for help. The temperature was dropping, and the Mustang wouldn't last another hour out here. Ethan spoke softly as he worked, pulling a multi-tool from his pocket. The chain was locked tight, but after a few minutes of careful prying, he managed to force the old padlock open. Dust staggered, then nearly collapsed. Ethan caught him, steadying the trembling horse as best he could. He found an old length of rope in his pack and fashioned a makeshift halter, looping it gently around Dust's head. Every move was slow, careful, a dance of trust, even as the horse flinched at every touch. Ethan murmured nonsense, words of comfort, as much for himself as for Dust. "We gotta move, buddy. There's a vet station not too far if we hurry. Come on, don't quit on me now." He led Dust out of the clearing, away from the ghost of the bear, step by step into the darkness. Each breath hung in the air. The wild, bitter night pressed down, but together, man and Mustang moved forward, one step, then another, carrying the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, rescue had found them in time. The night pressed on, black and endless, as Ethan led the battered Mustang through the shadowy pines. Dust stumbled often, his hooves dragging across rocks and tangled roots, each step a struggle against exhaustion and pain. Ethan glanced back constantly, feeling the weight of the bear's presence, as if those glinting eyes might reappear at any moment. His own heart pounded, adrenaline fading, replaced by a deep, gnawing worry. Was he doing enough? Could this half-dead horse make it through another hour in the freezing dark? The wind whistled in the branches, sometimes sounding like voices, sometimes just like the world holding its breath. Ethan kept talking anyway, his words low and steady, a lifeline he threw to the terrified animal at his side. "You're all right. You're with me now. We're gonna get out of here, I promise. Just a little further, buddy." He knew the area, but even so, everything looked different at night. The trail to the old veterinary outpost was narrow, winding, overgrown in places, almost invisible beneath the silvered moonlight. Ethan gripped the rope halter and pressed forward, boots crunching in the brittle grass, every muscle tense from cold and fear. Behind him, Dust wheezed, each breath ragged, a reminder of just how close death still clung to them both. Suddenly, a crash echoed through the trees behind them, a bough snapping, or maybe rocks tumbling down the slope. Ethan whirled, body tense, expecting to see the bear barreling after them, hunger and anger driving it on. Instead, the darkness yawned empty. He let out a long breath, but his nerves refused to settle. He looked at Dust, saw the panic in those wild eyes, and felt a deep, unexpected connection. He knew that kind of fear, the kind that never truly left you. Ethan had lived through it too, in other nights, other fires, moments when he'd wondered if rescue would ever come. That memory, sharp and sudden, gave him strength now. He wasn't just saving a horse. He was saving something in himself. The trek was grueling. Twice Dust faltered, almost collapsing, and Ethan had to pause, murmuring comfort and encouragement. "Don't give up. Come on, you can do this. Just a little more." He found himself repeating words others had once said to him, words that had kept him moving when everything else told him to quit. By the time the eastern sky began to gray, fingers of light touching the mountains, Ethan's own energy was almost spent. But there ahead, half hidden behind a stand of spruce, the lights of the small veterinary outpost finally appeared, a low building battered by years of storms but steady and warm against the pre-dawn chill. Ethan's relief was so strong it almost made him laugh out loud. He patted Dust's trembling neck. "We made it, buddy. Just a few more steps." They approached the front, and Ethan knocked urgently, his knuckles stinging against the wood. Inside, a light flicked on, and a tall, sharp-eyed woman in a worn parka opened the door. Dr. Naomi Brooks. She was the best veterinarian for 100 miles, and Ethan knew she'd seen just about everything, except maybe this. He barely managed to explain. "Found him chained out in the woods. Bear was on him. He's bad off, Doc, real bad." Dr. Brooks didn't hesitate. Years of emergencies had made her swift and decisive. "Bring him into the barn. I'll get the lights." She opened the doors to the small, warm stable, and Ethan led Dust inside. The sudden heat was a shock after hours in the freezing dark. Dust's legs buckled, but Ethan caught him, supporting the Mustang's weight as Dr. Brooks moved around them, assessing with a professional's calm efficiency. "Get him to the far stall. He needs fluids now. I'll prep an IV. Can you hold him steady?" Ethan nodded, never letting go of the rope. Dust's eyes rolled with terror, but something in Ethan's voice seemed to reach him, a thread of trust barely holding. "Easy, boy. You're safe. You're safe now." Dr. Brooks cleaned the wounds, cursing softly under her breath as she saw the raw skin beneath the chain marks, the older scars, the clear evidence of long-term neglect. Someone did this to him on purpose. This wasn't just bad luck. Ethan felt anger boil up. "Who would do that? Out here with the bears. People can be cruel," Dr. Brooks said, voice tight. "But he's alive, and you're the reason." While Dr. Brooks worked, Ethan never left Dust's side. He stroked the Mustang's neck, whispered nonsense, and felt the trembling ease ever so slightly. Dr. Brooks hung a bag of fluids, injected antibiotics, and dressed the worst of the wounds. Dawn slowly pushed the darkness away, bringing the first hopeful warmth into the barn. For a moment, it almost felt peaceful. Then the Mustang staggered, refusing the hay and water Dr. Brooks set out, shying away from her touch, even from Ethan, except when the man stood quietly beside him. "He's badly traumatized," Dr. Brooks explained. "He might not eat for a day or more. He's in shock." Ethan watched, helpless, as Dust pressed himself into the corner of the stall, nostrils flaring, eyes wide with fear. For hours, Ethan stayed there, barely moving, sometimes just reading aloud from an old paperback he found on the tack shelf, sometimes just sitting in silence, letting Dust hear the sound of his breath. At one point, a police cruiser rolled up outside, lights flashing blue in the early morning. Dr. Brooks stepped outside to talk to the deputy, explaining the situation. Ethan overheard pieces of it through the barn walls, the questions, the paperwork, the suspicion in the deputy's voice. Animal neglect wasn't rare out here, but what Ethan described, being chased by a bear, the desperate rescue in the dead of night, seemed almost too wild to believe. Dr. Brooks vouched for him. "If Ethan Collins says it happened, it did, and you can see what that horse went through." The deputy left with notes and a promise to check into local missing animals, but Ethan had the uneasy feeling this wouldn't be the last of it. Back inside, The Mustang had grown still, almost eerily quiet. Ethan crouched beside the stall, watching him, willing him to eat, to move, to trust. For a long time, neither man nor animal spoke or moved. But slowly, as the sun climbed higher and the barn filled with soft light, Dust's breathing slowed. He edged closer, just enough to brush his muzzle against Ethan's outstretched hand. It was a small thing, but it felt like a miracle. For the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan allowed himself a sliver of hope. The fight wasn't over. In fact, it had only just begun. As sunlight filtered through the cracks in the barn wall, painting stripes across the hay-strewn floor, the storm of the night before seemed like a bad dream. The world outside was calm now, the snow gently melting from the pine branches, and the biting wind replaced by a pale golden glow. But inside the small animal outpost, the fight for Dust's life was just beginning. Ethan hadn't slept. He'd kept vigil all night beside the stall, sometimes on his feet, sometimes huddled on a rough wooden bench with an old blanket around his shoulders. His eyes burned from lack of rest, but he didn't care. Every time Dust shifted, snorted, or shuddered in the darkness, Ethan was there, murmuring words of reassurance. It was an unspoken agreement, forged in the wild. If one gave up, they both might. Dr. Naomi Brooks arrived at dawn, hair pulled back, face marked with worry and determination. She barely paused to greet Ethan before checking on Dust. Her hands moved with practiced speed, pressing gently along the Mustang's ribs, inspecting the wounds from the chain, and checking his temperature and gums. "He's stable, but just barely," she said, voice hushed. "We'll need to keep the IV going another few hours. Dehydration's a killer in cases like this." She brought a bucket of warm mash, sweetened with molasses, hoping the enticing smell might tempt Dust to eat. But the Mustang shrank from her, eyes wide, flanks quivering, refusing the food and any touch that wasn't Ethan's. He stood pressed into the far corner, as if any movement might unleash new pain or threat. Ethan felt a pang of helplessness. He hasn't eaten, not a single bite. Should I try something else? Dr. Brooks shook her head. "Don't force him. Animals coming out of trauma need time. Just let him know you're here." So that's what Ethan did. All morning, he sat outside the stall, reading quietly from the battered paperback he'd found, a western about wild horses and lost cowboys, and letting the calm, steady rhythm of his voice fill the space. He spoke not just to Dust, but to the ache inside himself, the places the fire and the losses had hollowed out. Sometimes, he'd simply lean his back against the stall door, close his eyes, and breathe in the scent of horse and hay and antiseptic, letting his presence do the work words couldn't. The hours dragged. Every so often, Dust would shift his weight, the straw crunching beneath his hooves, but he remained wary, his trust given in tiny, reluctant pieces. Ethan learned to watch for the smallest signs, a flick of the ears, the tension in Dust's jaw relaxing when Ethan's voice was low and unhurried, the moment when the horse stopped shying away and simply stood, listening. By midday, Dr. Brooks returned with a syringe of antibiotics and painkillers. "You want to try holding him?" she asked gently, knowing how fragile the bond was. Ethan nodded, stepped into the stall, and spoke softly. "Easy, Dust. Easy now." He offered his hand, palm up, and waited. Dust's nostrils quivered, but he didn't bolt. Instead, after a long, tense moment, the Mustang let Ethan rest a hand along his neck, fingers brushing the tangled mane. "That's it," Ethan whispered. "You're all right." Dr. Brooks moved quickly, delivering the injection before Dust could react. The Mustang shuddered, but didn't pull away. For the first time, a little hope flickered in her eyes. "He'll need more treatment," but if he keeps letting you close, his odds get better. Afternoon turned to evening. The world outside grew quieter, the sun dipping behind the hills, the barn filling with the soft sounds of horses settling for the night. Ethan stayed put, dozing lightly, waking every time dust shifted. Sometime after sunset, when the barn was only lit by a single bulb hanging from a rafter, something changed. Dust lowered his head, ears turned forward. Ethan reached into his pocket, pulled out a slice of apple he'd saved from his breakfast, and held it out. At first, Dust just stared, uncertain. Then, with a sudden lunge, he snatched the fruit from Ethan's palm, chewing hungrily. The gesture was so sudden it made Ethan laugh, quietly, so as not to startle him. "Attaboy, that's what I'm talking about," he murmured, voice full of relief. The change was small, but real. Dust still refused to eat from Dr. Brooks's hand, but he took a few more bites from Ethan, an apple, then a bit of carrot. Then, hesitantly, a mouthful of sweet hay. The trauma lingered in every muscle, every cautious step, but something inside the Mustang was fighting to survive. And Ethan, watching, felt his own burdens lighten, just a fraction. The night passed with fewer scares. Dust dozed, his breathing slow and even, while Ethan kept his vigil. At some point, Dr. Brooks brought in a portable radio, letting country music play softly, filling the barn with the gentle rhythm of guitars and steel. She smiled at Ethan. "Sometimes the sound helps calm them." Ethan nodded. "It helps me too." Just before dawn, a distant coyote howled, and Dust startled, but this time he didn't bolt to the far corner. He just looked at Ethan, seeking reassurance. The man was ready, hand out, calm as always. There were setbacks, of course. Twice in the early morning, Dust refused water, and his breathing grew shallow. Dr. Brooks checked him, adjusting the IV, her face drawn with worry. "He's still touch and go. You can't let your guard down yet." Ethan nodded grimly. "I'm not going anywhere." Sometime near sunrise, exhaustion finally caught up with him. Ethan leaned against the stall and closed his eyes. As he drifted between sleep and wakefulness, memories intruded. Flashes of a burning house, the crackle of radio static, a voice shouting his name, the heat and smoke that had stolen so much from him. He woke with a jolt, sweat on his brow, but Dust was still there, watching. "Bad dreams, huh?" Ethan whispered. "I get those too." He sat there in silence, feeling the kinship in their scars. He knew then why he couldn't leave this horse. They were both fighting their way back from the edge, step by fragile step. As the new day dawned, Dust took a shaky step toward Ethan, nudging his shoulder gently, as if to say, "I'm still here." The bond, fragile but real, had begun to form, and with it, the first glimmer of hope, maybe for both of them. The days passed slowly at the small animal outpost. Time measured not by clocks, but by the steady rhythm of breath, the shuffling of hooves, and the careful dance between trust and fear. For the first time in years, Ethan Collins found himself rooted to a place, bound by responsibility and something deeper, a need to see Dust, the Mustang, survive and heal. There were no grand gestures now, just the patient repetition of small acts, feeding, watching, waiting, and speaking in low tones meant to soothe rather than startle. Each morning, Ethan arrived at the barn before sunrise, a cup of black coffee in hand, and took his place beside Dust's stall. He read quietly from a worn paperback, sometimes aloud, letting the gentle flow of words fill the quiet space. Sometimes he simply sat in silence, his presence as steady as the old timbers overhead. At first, Dust remained wary, flinching at every movement, keeping his distance as if one wrong word might shatter the fragile peace between them. Ethan was used to the slow pace of healing. He'd lived it himself, after all. Since the accident, he'd found solace in solitude, his days drifting by in a blur of memory and regret. He didn't talk about the fire, the day everything changed. It was easier to keep it locked away, to avoid the questions that came with pitying eyes. But with Dust, he found he didn't have to speak at all. The horse understood pain, the kind that lingered long after the wounds had healed. Day by day, small changes began to show. Dust, who had once shrunk from every touch, now watched Ethan with cautious curiosity. When Ethan reached into his pocket for an apple, Dust stretched his neck forward, nostrils flaring, before gently plucking the fruit from his palm. It was a minor victory, but one that made Ethan smile. A real, unguarded smile he hadn't felt in a long time. One afternoon, after the clinic had quieted and Dr. Brooks was tending to paperwork, Ethan decided to try something new. He fetched a soft, bristled brush from the tack room and stood just outside Dust's stall. "All right, let's see if you'll let me get some of this mud off you," he murmured, voice calm and steady. He held out the brush, waiting. Dust hesitated, ears swiveling back and forth, but then he took a tentative step forward. With the utmost care, Ethan reached over and let the brush graze the Mustang's shoulder. Dust tensed but didn't move away. Encouraged, Ethan continued, working slowly along the horse's neck and withers, murmuring nonsense as he brushed out weeks of dirt and tangles. With each stroke, Dust relaxed a little more, and by the end, he stood still, head lowered, letting Ethan's hand rest against his neck. The barn was quiet except for the sound of breathing and the gentle swish of the brush. It was in these moments of shared silence that the bond between man and horse deepened, a connection built not on words, but on presence and patience. That night, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, Ethan lingered in the barn, lost in thought. Dust stood close, occasionally nudging Ethan's shoulder as if to ask for more. The connection was undeniable now, something that filled a space Ethan hadn't realized was empty. Flashbacks crept in when the world was quiet. Ethan found himself remembering the day of the fire, the smoke, the heat, the panic in his captain's voice. He remembered carrying a child from the burning house, lungs burning, the world narrowed to sirens and shouts. He remembered the silence afterward, the funerals, the lost friends, the questions no one dared ask. It was a pain that never faded, a wound deeper than any scar. He hadn't talked to anyone about it. Not really. People meant well, but their words never reached the place where the hurt lived. With Dust, he didn't have to explain. The horse's dark eyes held a familiar sadness, an understanding that came from shared survival. Some nights, Ethan sat in the barn long after everyone else had gone home, just listening to Dust's breathing, feeling the weight of his own losses lessen, if only a little. Dr. Brooks noticed the change. One morning, she found Ethan half asleep against the stall, Dust standing beside him like a silent guardian. She smiled softly. "You two are good for each other," she said, handing Ethan a cup of coffee. "Healing's never a straight line, but I think you're both on your way." Ethan nodded, unsure how to put his gratitude into words. Instead, he turned to Dust and offered another apple. This time, Dust took it without hesitation, lips brushing Ethan's palm with surprising gentleness. Progress came in fits and starts. Some days, Dust seemed to retreat, shying from contact, refusing food unless Ethan fed him by hand. Other days, he would press close, letting Ethan run his hands along his back and shoulders, even lifting his hooves for cleaning. The smallest victories felt enormous, like the first time Dust nickered softly at Ethan's approach, or when he nudged Ethan's hat off his head and whinnied, as if sharing a joke. Ethan began to share more of his story, speaking softly in the evenings when the barn was quiet. He told Dust about the fire, the guilt he carried, the friends he'd lost. The Mustang listened, head cocked, eyes gentle and wise. It felt like a confession, but there was no judgment, only understanding. One rainy afternoon, a group of local school children visited the outpost as part of an educational program. They crowded around Dust's stall, eager and noisy, but the Mustang stood firm, watching Ethan for reassurance. With a steady hand, Ethan showed the children how to offer Dust a carrot, guiding them through the process. Dust accepted the treat from a brave little girl, his trust in Ethan extending just far enough to include these new, gentle hands. The children cheered, and Ethan's heart lifted, proof that healing was happening, one tiny step at a time. Evenings became Ethan's favorite time. As the sun set and the world quieted, he and Dust would stand together in the fading light, the silence between them comfortable and full. Some nights, Ethan would sing old cowboy songs, his rough voice blending with the chorus of crickets and nightbirds. Dust listened, sometimes nudging Ethan's shoulder as if in approval. As the days turned to weeks, the change in both man and Mustang was undeniable. Dust's coat grew glossy, his wounds healing, his body filling out with muscle and strength. Ethan, too, began to stand a little taller, the lines of worry on his face easing, his eyes brighter. Their bond was unbreakable now, built not on drama, but on 1,000 shared silences and small acts of trust. The journey wasn't over, but for the first time in a long while, Ethan felt hope stirring. He looked at Dust, saw the same hope reflected back, and knew they were both ready for the next step. Tomorrow, the Mustang would leave the outpost for a sanctuary, a place where he could run with other horses and begin a new chapter. But tonight, in the quiet of the barn, man and horse simply stood together, two survivors, healing in the only way they knew how, one small step at a time. When the morning came for Dust to leave the outpost, the air was sharp and bracing, the kind that promised change. Ethan arrived before the sun had fully risen, his breath visible in the pale light, as he carried a bucket of feed and a faded blanket he'd bought the night before. He found Dust waiting at the stall door, ears pricked, eyes alert in a way they hadn't been since his rescue. There was a new energy in the Mustang, a spark of curiosity, a glimmer of trust. The staff at the outpost had arranged for Dust to be transported to Clearwater Sanctuary, a sprawling property on the edge of the valley known for rehabilitating wild horses and giving them a second chance at freedom. The drive would take a couple of hours, and Ethan was determined to ride with Dust the whole way, no matter how uncomfortable the cramped trailer might be. Dr. Brooks met Ethan in the barn, clipboard in hand, her usual professionalism softened by genuine affection. "He's ready," she said, stroking Dust's muzzle. "Just remember, sanctuary life is different. He'll need time to adjust, and so will you." Ethan nodded. "I'll be there. I want to help him settle in." Dust loaded into the trailer without panic, though he paused at the ramp, nostrils flaring. Ethan coaxed him with soft words, brushing his neck, feeling the powerful muscles tense under his hand. Finally, Dust stepped forward, and Ethan closed the gate gently behind him, refusing to let anyone else rush the moment. The drive was long, winding through forests and across icy rivers. Ethan rode in the back with Dust, humming tunelessly, telling stories of open meadows and gentle rains. Every so often, He'd reach through the slats and rest a hand on Dust's flank, grounding them both. The Mustang shifted restlessly, but didn't panic. Each mile put distance between them and the memory of chains, bears, and abandonment. Clearwater Sanctuary appeared around a final bend, fenced pastures, rolling hills, and a barn painted deep red. Wild mustangs grazed in distant fields, their manes tossing in the wind. The place felt alive, a world apart from the pain Dust had known. A team of handlers met them at the gate. They worked efficiently but gently, greeting Dust with calm voices and careful hands. Ethan watched, nerves tight, as they led Dust into a spacious paddock separated from the main herd by sturdy rails. For now, Dust would have time to acclimate, to observe the other horses from a safe distance. Ethan stayed through the intake process, learning from the experienced staff. He listened as Maria, the sanctuary manager, explained how integration worked. "Some horses settle in quick," she said, "but the ones with real trauma, like Dust, need more time. We let them set the pace. Trust is everything here." As the sun climbed, Ethan watched Dust explore his new space. The Mustang circled the paddock, nostrils flared, skittish at every strange sound. When a pair of geese flew overhead, honking loudly, Dust bolted to the far side and stood trembling until Ethan entered the paddock and spoke softly. "It's all right. You're safe now. Just breathe." Ethan's presence helped, but the transition was anything but smooth. Dust was slow to approach the water trough, spooked by the banging of a distant gate, and startled when a neighboring horse called out. At times, the progress they'd made felt like it was unraveling, old wounds reopening, trust tested all over again. Maria assured Ethan, "It's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Give him space, but don't let him retreat from the world." Ethan volunteered to stay and help. He wanted to learn everything: how to muck stalls, spread hay, fill water buckets, and work the sanctuary routines. The staff welcomed his willingness, respecting the quiet patience and work ethic that made him stand out. He didn't complain about the early mornings or the sore muscles. He'd found a purpose here, something worth showing up for. He watched the herd for hours, noting their social dances, the gentle nudges, the dramatic chases, the quiet moments when 2 horses would stand side by side, sharing breath. Sometimes Dust would stand at the fence, watching but never joining. Ethan took those opportunities to groom him, talking about his day, sharing hopes and frustrations alike. One afternoon, Dust startled at the sound of a tractor, bolting around the paddock in a blind panic. Ethan dropped his tools and vaulted the fence, approaching with slow, open hands. "Dust, easy! I'm here! Come on, it's all right!" The Mustang paced and snorted, eyes wide with old terror, but Ethan didn't give up. He spoke softly, closed the gap inch by inch, and finally Dust let him slip a halter over his head. Ethan led him to a quiet corner, brushing his coat until the shaking stopped. That night, as he left the sanctuary, Ethan felt both exhausted and fulfilled. The setbacks were real, but so were the victories. Dust now ate calmly when Ethan was near, allowed other staff to approach, and, on a rare sunny afternoon, let another Mustang graze beside him without bolting. Maria praised Ethan's dedication. "You two are making a difference for each other. I can see it. Just remember, healing isn't always pretty. He'll have bad days. So will you." Ethan nodded, understanding the truth of her words. There were days when he questioned his progress, haunted by memories that surfaced in the quiet. Some nights, he lay awake in his small apartment on the sanctuary grounds, replaying old regrets. But every morning, he woke ready to try again, for himself and for Dust. As the weeks passed, Ethan became a fixture at Clearwater. He learned from seasoned hands, earning their respect by working hard, asking questions, and never shying away from the difficult tasks. Slowly, the Mustang Sanctuary became more than just a job. It was a place of belonging. And Dust, step by halting step, began to find his place. He ventured closer to the herd, watched the older mares graze, and even, one windy afternoon, joined a pair of colts in a short, awkward gallop across the field. The staff cheered, and Ethan felt his chest swell with pride. Their bond grew stronger with every challenge faced and every hard-won moment of peace. In the sanctuary's fields, under the wide Montana sky, man and Mustang both learned that healing wasn't a finish line, but a journey, one that could only be made together. The first true Montana spring rain had just passed, leaving the sanctuary fields sparkling with puddles and the air smelling of wet grass and new beginnings. Dust stood at the far edge of the paddock, ears flicking as other Mustangs played in the mud. Ethan watched him from the barn, a sense of pride warming his chest, until the peace was broken by the crunch of tires on gravel and the rumble of a truck he'd never seen before. The vehicle was old, battered, and mean-looking, its paint peeling, the bed filled with rusty tools and tangled rope. The sanctuary staff noticed it too. Maria left her office, her brow furrowed, while two ranch hands paused mid-task, their bodies tense. Ethan's stomach twisted. Something was wrong. The driver's door slammed open, and out stepped a man Ethan had hoped to never meet, Roy Anders, Dust's former owner. Roy was tall, broad, his skin rough from sun and wind, eyes hard as stone. He stalked across the lot with a swagger that reeked of trouble. Maria met him halfway, her posture calm but unyielding. "I'm looking for my horse," Roy spat, eyes roaming the paddocks until he locked on Dust's unmistakable markings. "That one right there, the sorrel with the busted ear. I want him back. He's mine." Maria crossed her arms, refusing to be intimidated. "This horse was abandoned, chained in the wild. Animal welfare is already investigating his case, Roy. You don't have any right to him anymore." Roy snorted, pulling out a tattered set of papers. "Got proof of ownership right here. Don't care what you think. I'm taking him home, or you'll be talking to my lawyer." Ethan stepped forward, voice steady but full of heat. "You left him to die, Roy. He'd be bear food right now if I hadn't found him. He's not going anywhere with you." For a moment, the air was electric, the tension thick as thunderclouds. Roy squared up, towering over Ethan. "Listen, hero. You want to play savior, that's fine. But that horse is worth money, and you're trespassing on my business. You better back off." Sanctuary staff started to gather. One of them, a burly woman named Tessa, pulled out her phone and started recording. Dr. Brooks, who had arrived for a health check on another horse, calmly dialed animal welfare on her cell. The situation felt ready to explode. Maria raised her voice, drawing everyone's attention. "Roy, the sanctuary operates under state protection. If you have a legitimate claim, you can take it up with the authorities. But you're not taking that horse today." Roy glared at Ethan, then at the staff, realizing he was outnumbered but not yet outmaneuvered. He jabbed a finger at Ethan's chest. "This ain't over. You can't just steal from folks and hide behind some charity. I'll be back, with the sheriff, with lawyers, whatever it takes." He stormed off, but not before casting one last venomous look at Dust, who had watched the whole scene from a distance, muscles tense, tail flicking nervously. The truck sped away, spraying gravel. For a long moment, no one spoke. Ethan felt his hands shaking with anger and adrenaline. Maria finally broke the silence, voice steady. "We need to get everything in order. Documentation, photos, vet reports, anything that proves Dust's condition when he arrived." We'll need statements, too. Roy's not bluffing about legal action. The sanctuary mobilized as a team. Maria and Dr. Brooks pulled up Dust's intake files and photos, detailing every injury and scar he'd arrived with. Ethan wrote a detailed statement describing the night of the rescue. The chain, the bear, the struggle through the cold. Tessa sent her video footage to the local animal welfare office, while 2 other volunteers began cataloging all the veterinary bills, feed costs, and care records Dust had accrued since his arrival. Community support began to pour in when word of the confrontation spread. Locals who'd heard about Dust's story rallied on social media, posting messages of encouragement and sharing news stories about animal abuse and sanctuary work. Donations increased. Several neighbors, including ranchers and shopkeepers, signed a petition supporting Dust's permanent placement at the sanctuary. "This horse is part of our town's second chance," one message read. "He's not going back to a man who would leave him for dead." Ethan was grateful, but the anxiety gnawed at him. He spent the next days on edge, unable to sleep well. Every truck that passed the sanctuary road made him tense. He stayed late in Dust's paddock, brushing his coat, offering quiet reassurance. Dust felt the change too. He was jumpier, skittish at every loud noise, reluctant to approach the fence when strangers gathered outside. One afternoon, Ethan found Dust pacing anxiously, sweating despite the cool air. He spoke softly, rubbing the Mustang's neck. "It's not your fault, buddy. I promise I won't let anything happen to you. We're not going backward." The legal process began in earnest. The sanctuary's lawyer met with Maria and Dr. Brooks, reviewing every file and piece of evidence. Dr. Brooks prepared a thorough report, including medical opinions on the old injuries, the dehydration, the mental trauma. "Any judge will see the truth," she told Ethan. "We just have to make sure we're prepared." The day before the hearing, Roy returned, this time with 2 men and the local sheriff in tow. They stood at the gate, voices raised. The sheriff, a tired-looking man with a kind face, listened patiently as Roy ranted about thieves and bleeding-heart animal nuts. But when Maria calmly presented the files, photos, and statements, the sheriff nodded and promised to keep things civil. "This is for the judge to decide now. Nobody's taken the horse until then." Ethan felt a mix of relief and dread. The fight was far from over, but at least Dust was safe, for now. That evening, as twilight crept over the sanctuary and the herd settled in the golden grass, Ethan sat in the paddock, Dust's head resting on his shoulder. He thought of everything they'd overcome, every step that had brought them here. The future was uncertain, but he knew he would stand by Dust no matter what. And for the first time, he realized he wasn't alone. The sanctuary team, the community, and even the Mustang herd, they all stood together, a barrier against the darkness of the past. Whatever storm Roy brought next, they were ready to face it, together. The courthouse in downtown Livingston wasn't much to look at, just a squat brick building on the edge of Main Street, wedged between a diner and a hardware store. But for Ethan, Maria, Dr. Brooks, and the entire team from Clearwater Sanctuary, it might as well have been the steps of destiny. The morning of the hearing, the parking lot was already filling up. Locals gathered by the entrance, some with signs reading "Justice for Dust" and "Protect Our Mustangs." The story had swept through town, sparking conversations in coffee shops, at feed stores, and in classrooms. Everyone seemed to have an opinion, but most agreed. The Mustang deserved better than what he'd suffered. Ethan arrived early, nerves twisting his stomach into knots. He wore his only suit, awkward and a little tight across the shoulders, his hands rough and scrubbed clean. As he waited on the courthouse steps, he saw Maria and Dr. Brooks approach, both dressed in simple, professional outfits. Dr. Brooks carried a thick folder of evidence and vet records. Maria had a binder of statements and letters of support. "Ready?" Maria asked, offering a warm but tense smile. "As I'll ever be," Ethan replied, glancing at the crowd. "It feels like everyone in town is here." Dr. Brooks nodded. "That's a good thing. People care. It makes a difference." Inside, the courtroom filled quickly. Roy Anders, Dust's former owner, sat at the defendant's table with his lawyer, a sharp-faced man from Billings who looked as if he hadn't smiled in a decade. Roy's arms were crossed, his glare fixed on Ethan and the sanctuary team. He looked sure of himself, but Ethan could see the tension in his jaw, a man who wasn't used to being challenged. The judge, a middle-aged woman with silver-streaked hair and a reputation for fairness, entered promptly and called the hearing to order. The bailiff asked everyone to stand. Ethan's heart pounded as he took his seat, aware that Dust's entire future hinged on what happened in this room. Roy's lawyer spoke first, presenting ownership documents and insisting that the Mustang was Roy's property, legally purchased at auction years ago. "My client's rights have been trampled by vigilantes and animal extremists," he said, voice sharp and clipped. "He demands the immediate return of his horse and restitution for damages." Maria's lawyer countered with calm, methodical precision. "Ownership does not trump cruelty. This case is about what was done to an animal, not about a piece of paper." She introduced Dr. Brooks, who was sworn in as an expert witness. Dr. Brooks laid out the facts in clear, unflinching terms. She described the injuries Dust had suffered, the dehydration and malnutrition, the old scars and fresh wounds from the chain. She showed photos taken the night Dust was rescued, images of raw flesh, sunken eyes, and a body pushed to the brink. "In my professional opinion," she concluded, "this horse was deliberately abandoned, left to die in the wild. He would not have survived another night." Roy's lawyer tried to discredit her, questioning her methods. But Dr. Brooks held firm. She detailed every treatment, every step of Dust's recovery, even producing logs and vet bills for the court to review. Ethan was next. He stood, hands shaking only slightly, and told the story from his own eyes. The midnight rescue, the bear's roar, the panic and exhaustion, and the desperate trek through the cold. He spoke of Dust's terror, his slow journey back to trust, and the bond they'd forged. He didn't embellish or dramatize. He let the truth stand on its own. When Roy's lawyer tried to rattle him, "Are you in the habit of taking animals that don't belong to you, Mr. Collins?" Ethan stayed steady. "I'm in the habit of helping those who can't help themselves," he replied, his voice strong. "And that horse was as close to dying as any I've ever seen." The sanctuary staff gave their statements, each reinforcing the pattern of abuse and neglect Dust had suffered. Maria spoke passionately about Clearwater's mission and the importance of second chances, not just for horses, but for people too. The most powerful testimony came when the judge reviewed Roy's record. Maria's lawyer had pulled every report: old complaints about neglect, fines for animal cruelty, neighbor statements about chained and starving horses. The pattern was undeniable. Roy grew angrier, his face flushing red. He tried to argue, insisting he'd done nothing wrong and that Dust was just an old nag, no good for anything but pasture. The courtroom murmured at his callousness. Finally, the judge called for closing arguments. Roy's lawyer tried to make it about property rights, warning of dangerous precedents. Maria's lawyer reminded the court of the purpose of animal protection laws. We don't just protect property, we protect the voiceless. We stand up for what's right. The judge was silent for a long moment, then delivered her decision in a voice that was clear, firm, and without apology. Ownership is not an excuse for cruelty. The evidence shows a pattern of neglect and abuse. This horse will remain under the permanent care of Clearwater Sanctuary. Mr. Anders, you are barred from owning or acquiring horses for 5 years, and animal welfare will monitor your activities. Court is adjourned. A wave of relief swept through the room. Maria hugged Ethan, Dr. Brooks wiped away a tear, and the courtroom erupted in quiet applause. Reporters snapped photos, supporters shook hands and hugged. Outside, the crowd cheered when news of the verdict reached them. Ethan stepped into the sunlight, overwhelmed by the rush of emotions, relief, pride, and a deep gratitude to everyone who'd fought for Dust. He realized, as the sanctuary team gathered around him, that the victory was bittersweet. The scars on Dust's body and spirit would remain, and the reality of cruelty was something no court could erase. But there was hope now, a tangible, living hope that things could get better. Back at Clearwater that evening, Ethan walked out to the paddock under a sky blazing with sunset. Dust saw him coming, lifted his head, and trotted over, the first hint of a playful whinny in his throat. Ethan reached out, ran his hand along Dust's neck, and whispered, "You're safe now. No one's ever going to hurt you again." The battle had been fought and won, but the story wasn't over. For Dust and Ethan, this was just another step on the long road to healing, a road they would walk together, supported by a community that had chosen compassion over convenience and justice over silence. With the legal storm behind them and the threat of Dust's past finally lifted, Clearwater Sanctuary felt lighter, as if the air itself had shed a heavy weight. News of the court's decision swept across the valley. Local newspapers ran stories with headlines like "Mustang finds justice" and "Clearwater Sanctuary wins fight for rescue horse," sparking a fresh wave of community support. New volunteers arrived, some bringing baked goods for staff, others just wanting to see the Mustang who had inspired the whole town. Yet for Dust, healing was a quiet, ongoing process. The scars on his flanks faded slowly, but the memories of chains and cold, of fear and hunger, lingered deep inside. At first, he kept to the edges of the herd, watching the other horses with wary curiosity, joining only when Ethan was near. The sanctuary's fields, wide and green under the Montana sky, offered safety, but trust was something built one day at a time. Ethan made it his mission to give Dust every chance. He volunteered for early morning shifts, greeting the Mustang with a smile and an apple, walking beside him through the rolling paddocks. Sometimes Ethan would bring a folding chair and simply sit, reading or humming old country songs. Dust grew used to his presence, nickering softly when he saw Ethan, nudging his shoulder with increasing confidence. Spring burst into full bloom, and with it, Dust's world grew larger. One clear morning, while Ethan cleaned a trough near the big field, he glanced up to see Dust standing at the fence line, ears pricked, eyes following a group of young colts as they ran in circles, chasing each other's shadows. Ethan smiled, heart swelling with hope, and gave a soft whistle. To his surprise, Dust stepped forward. First a slow walk, then a trot, then, as if remembering himself, a burst of speed. He joined the herd, legs stretching long and lean, his mane flying in the wind. For the first time, Dust ran, not out of fear, but for the pure joy of motion. He galloped past the others, nipping at their flanks, then slowed and turned, inviting the other Mustangs to follow him. The sanctuary staff paused in their chores to watch, and soon the whole field was alive with the thunder of hooves and the bright calls of horses at play. Maria found Ethan at the fence, his eyes shining. "You did this," she said quietly. "You gave him back his life." Ethan shook his head. We all did, and he did most of the work himself. The change in Dust was undeniable. He ate eagerly, his coat gleamed with health, and he began seeking out the company of other horses. Not just Ethan. He let the sanctuary's youngest volunteers brush his mane and offer treats. When new rescues arrived, Dust watched them, sometimes walking alongside the frightened newcomers, as if to say, I know how you feel. It gets better. Word of Dust's recovery and the victory in court brought visitors from miles around. Local schools arranged field trips, and children listened wide-eyed as Maria or Ethan told Dust's story. News crews from regional TV stations filmed short segments about animal rescue and the importance of second chances. Each time, Dust stood calm and steady, a living testament to resilience. One morning, Ethan arrived to find a small crowd near the main barn. A van had pulled up, painted with the logo of a national animal welfare group. Out stepped a journalist, a cameraman, and a public relations specialist with a stack of flyers. They were there to film a feature on Dust's journey, hoping to inspire other communities to stand up for their animals. Ethan was nervous, but Maria nudged him forward. You're the reason this story matters. Just be yourself. The interview took place by the fence with Dust grazing in the background. The journalist asked about that first night, the rescue, the setbacks, and the moments that made Ethan believe Dust could truly recover. Ethan spoke from the heart. I think healing happens in the little moments. When you show up, even when it's hard, even when you don't see a difference right away. It's about not giving up, even when everything tells you to walk away. When asked how Dust had changed him, Ethan paused, looking at the Mustang grazing nearby. He taught me that courage isn't a single act. It's 100 choices to keep trying, to care, to believe in hope. We saved each other, in a way. The segment aired that evening, sparking hundreds of messages and donations. Volunteers signed up from neighboring counties, bringing fresh energy to the sanctuary. Maria expanded the educational programs, and Dr. Brooks hosted workshops on equine therapy and humane rescue practices. But for Ethan, the biggest change was personal. He found himself waking with purpose, eager to face the day. He took on new responsibilities, learning from Maria and the senior handlers how to manage the herd, treat injuries, and train volunteers. He found that in serving the animals, he was healing too. His nightmares less frequent, the ache in his chest lighter each day. One afternoon, a summer thunderstorm rolled over the sanctuary. The herd huddled together under a stand of pines, and Ethan rushed out to check on Dust. He found the Mustang not hiding, but standing at the edge of the group, ears flicking as lightning cracked overhead. When Ethan called his name, Dust trotted over, calm and steady, letting Ethan stroke his neck as the storm passed. It was a simple moment, but for Ethan, it felt like everything had changed. Dust was no longer just a survivor. He was a leader, an example to the other rescues that hope was possible, even after the darkest nights. That weekend, the sanctuary held an open house, inviting the community to celebrate Dust's new life. There were games for kids, food trucks, and guided tours of the pastures. Ethan led Dust around the grounds, telling his story to anyone who would listen. Children patted Dust's nose, and adults snapped photos, some with tears in their eyes. As the sun set over Clearwater, casting gold across the fields, Ethan stood with Dust at the top of a grassy rise. The herd grazed below, the air buzzing with laughter and music. For the first time, Ethan let himself believe that this, peace, hope, belonging, wasn't just a dream. It was real. Dust nudged his shoulder, warm and insistent, and Ethan smiled, scratching behind the Mustang's ear. "Look at us now, partner," Ethan whispered. "Who would have thought?" In the distance, Maria called for a group photo. Ethan joined the sanctuary team, Dust beside him, surrounded by friends old and new. The camera flashed, capturing not just a moment, but the living proof of what hope, kindness, and persistence could build. Dust's story was still unfolding, but he and Ethan were no longer defined by what they'd survived. They were living proof that healing could flourish against the odds, that every second chance deserved to be celebrated. Sometimes, when the fields were quiet and the sun hovered just above the distant ridges, Ethan would lean on the pasture fence and watch Dust with a kind of awe he rarely admitted aloud. The Mustang was nearly unrecognizable from the battered creature Ethan had first rescued. His coat now glossy and golden, his stride free, powerful, and proud. Dust moved through the herd with confidence, a gentle leader among the newer rescues and a steadfast companion to those still learning what safety meant. But the most profound changes, Ethan realized, weren't just visible. They lived in the moments in between, the silences, the setbacks, the patience that healing required from everyone involved. On a warm evening, after the last tour group had left the sanctuary, Ethan found himself sitting in the grass just outside the main paddock. Dust ambled over, nickering softly, and lowered his head beside Ethan's shoulder. For a while neither moved, sharing the hush of dusk, the songs of meadowlarks, and the scent of wild sage. Ethan glanced at the Mustang and felt a rush of gratitude, a feeling as deep as grief, but brighter. He remembered the first days, the fear, the trembling, the way Dust refused food or touch from anyone but him. He remembered his own battles too, the nightmares and guilt that had haunted him since the fire, the feeling of being lost even in a crowd. It struck Ethan, sitting in the fading sunlight, that rescue was never a single act. It wasn't the moment he cut the chain, or even the night they survived the bear and the cold. It was every moment afterward, showing up again and again, even when it felt like nothing was changing, even when the pain returned, sharp and unwelcome. Real courage isn't just a moment of bravery. It's showing up again and again for those who can't save themselves. The words echoed in his mind, a lesson he'd learned from Dust, from Maria and Dr. Brooks, and from every volunteer who refused to give up when hope seemed thin. In those early days, Ethan had wanted a quick fix, a dramatic turnaround, an instant sign that everything would be okay. But Dust had taught him otherwise. Healing wasn't a sprint. It was a slow, winding journey, marked by failures and setbacks, small victories, and new beginnings. There were days when Dust would shy from a touch, or refuse food, or startle at a sudden noise. There were nights when Ethan lay awake, wondering if he'd done enough, if anything he tried could erase the scars Dust carried, or the ones he bore himself. But over time, the patience paid off. Dust began to trust again, first with Ethan, then with the sanctuary staff, and finally with the other horses. He became a symbol, not just of survival, but of what could happen when empathy and persistence were allowed to work their slow magic. Ethan's thoughts drifted as he watched a young colt, new to the sanctuary, prance awkwardly in the field. Dust ambled over to the colt, lowered his head, and breathed softly in greeting. The colt, at first nervous, relaxed at Dust's side. In that simple gesture, Ethan saw the whole arc of their journey: pain, fear, patience, and finally connection. The sanctuary had become a place where stories like this unfolded every day. People from across the state wrote letters and emails, asking how they could help, offering to foster or adopt rescues, sending donations or supplies. Dr. Brooks started a program for at-risk youth, pairing them with the gentler Mustangs for therapy and confidence building. Ethan watched kids, tough and guarded at first, melt in the presence of these resilient horses. He recognized himself in those kids, the way they flinched from kindness, how long it took for trust to blossom. One afternoon, Ethan recorded a short video for the sanctuary's website, a kind of voiceover letter to everyone who'd followed Dust's story. He spoke quietly, the camera lingering on Dust grazing behind him. Sometimes people ask what it takes to save a life. Most days, it doesn't feel like heroics. It's patience. It's listening. It's getting up every morning, no matter how hard the day before was, and choosing to try again. Healing takes time. It's not always easy. Sometimes it's messy, sometimes it hurts, and sometimes you fail. But if you stick with it, if you keep showing up, change happens. For the horse, and for you. He paused, watching Dust nuzzle a volunteer, a simple, unremarkable act that meant everything. Empathy is the real engine of change, not just for animals, but for all of us. When you see the world through another's eyes, even if that other doesn't speak your language, it becomes harder to turn away. It becomes easier to do the right thing. That video went modestly viral, drawing attention not just to Dust, but to the sanctuary's larger mission. Donations increased, but more importantly, new foster homes opened up, and local ranchers began partnering with Clearwater to give older or neglected horses a chance at new life. Ethan's own healing was quieter, less public. He found himself laughing more, his nightmares fading as his days filled with purpose. He built friendships with the volunteers, went fishing with Maria's husband, and even taught a handful of local teens how to fix fences and care for horses. Sometimes he still carried the weight of the past, but Dust's steady presence reminded him that pain could transform into something new, a source of strength, not just sorrow. Late one evening after a storm had swept the valley, Ethan walked the pastures, checking on the herd. He found Dust standing guard over two nervous rescues, sheltering them from the wind. Ethan leaned on the fence, a smile tugging at his lips. "We got through another one, huh?" he murmured. "You're not just a survivor now. You're a teacher." As the moon rose, Ethan knew that Dust's story, like his own, would never really end. There would always be new challenges, new horses to help, new wounds to tend. But that was the beauty of rescue. It wasn't about erasing the past, but building something stronger on top of it. The sanctuary had become a beacon, proof that empathy could ripple outward, inspiring kindness in strangers and courage in the broken-hearted. Dust's legacy was more than just survival. It was a testament to the patience and compassion that turned brokenness into belonging. And for Ethan, that was the deepest lesson of all. The first hint of autumn brushed the sanctuary with cool air and golden light, painting the fields in soft shades of amber and green. At dawn, mist curled low along the fences, and the distant mountains glowed with the promise of a new season. Life at Clearwater Sanctuary had found its rhythm again. Each day a blend of chores and laughter, of old friends and new arrivals, of hope and healing that stretched far beyond a single horse or a single man. Dust ran now, not because he had to, but because he could. Across the broad pastures he galloped, mane streaming, hooves striking the earth in a powerful, exuberant rhythm that drew smiles from everyone who watched. No longer the frightened, broken animal chained and forgotten. Dust had become a symbol of second chances, of hard-won trust, of the quiet strength it took to keep showing up, even after the world had let you down. Ethan stood at the fence one crisp morning, coffee warming his hands as he watched Dust race another Mustang through the tall grass. A group of volunteers gathered nearby, talking softly as they prepared feed and cleaned tack. Ethan listened with a quiet satisfaction as they shared stories, not just about Dust, but about other rescues, each one a reminder of what the sanctuary had become. One of the new volunteers, a high school senior named Maddie, approached Ethan with a nervous smile. "I heard you rescued Dust," she said, glancing at the Mustang. "Do you think... could I try brushing him?" Ethan smiled and handed her a soft brush. "Go slow. Let him sniff your hand first. He'll let you know when he's ready." Maddie entered the paddock, her movements cautious but full of hope. Dust watched her approach, then lowered his head, ears flicking in curiosity. Maddie reached out, palm open, and after a moment, Dust nosed her hand, then stood quietly as she brushed his neck. Across the pasture, another group of volunteers cheered. For Maddie and for Dust, it was a small victory, a shared beginning built on trust. The sanctuary had grown in the months since Dust's legal victory. With community support and a surge of new donations, Maria had added a new barn and expanded the pastures, allowing Clearwater to accept more horses in need. A network of foster homes sprang up across the county, and local schools sent students for service projects, pairing learning with empathy. Ethan found himself in a new role too. No longer just the man who had saved Dust, he became a mentor to the next generation of volunteers. He taught them how to approach a frightened horse, how to listen with patience, and, most of all, how to see the story behind every scar. Some days, Ethan still felt the pull of old memories, the shadow of grief from his time as a firefighter. But now those memories sat beside newer ones, of Dust's first gallop, of a nervous volunteer finding confidence, of families adopting their first rescue horse. Pain hadn't disappeared, but it had been transformed by purpose and connection. One weekend, Maria asked Ethan to speak at a community open house, a celebration of the sanctuary's successes and a call to action for more help. Ethan hesitated. He'd never liked the spotlight, but he agreed, knowing the importance of sharing not just Dust's story, but the lesson at its heart. He stood before a crowd of neighbors, volunteers, students, and donors, his voice steady, his eyes searching for the right words. Dust grazed peacefully nearby, a living emblem of everything Clearwater stood for. Most people think rescue is about one big moment, a dramatic save, a miracle recovery. But that's not the whole story. Rescue is a journey. It's every early morning, every setback, every time you wonder if you're doing enough. It's showing up, even when it's hard, even when you're tired, even when you're not sure it matters. We talk a lot about second chances here, and I've seen what they can do. I've seen a horse come back from the brink and learn to trust again. I've seen people, myself included, find healing in the slow, steady work of caring for something outside themselves. The truth is, redemption doesn't just heal the rescued. It heals the rescuer, too. He paused, looking at the faces before him, young and old, each touched in some way by the story of a Mustang who refused to give up. Every broken soul deserves a new beginning. Sometimes the biggest difference you can make is to believe in someone when they've stopped believing in themselves. Dust showed me that. He showed all of us. The crowd applauded, some wiping away tears. Maria hugged Ethan, her voice thick with emotion. "You changed this place, Ethan. Dust did too. You remind us why we do what we do." As the day faded into evening, children chased horses along the fence line. Families picnicked under the cottonwoods, and the sanctuary glowed with laughter and light. Ethan found Dust by the far pasture, grazing contentedly as the sky turned lavender and gold. He leaned on the fence, feeling the cool breeze and the warmth in his chest. "We did it, boy," he said softly. And there's more to come. Dust lifted his head, eyes bright, and for a moment, Ethan thought he saw understanding there, a deep, quiet knowing that passed between them without words. In the days and weeks that followed, Ethan continued to mentor volunteers, sharing stories and lessons learned. He encouraged them to look beyond the obvious, to recognize resilience in every hesitant step, every cautious glance, every flicker of hope. Some of the Mustangs he helped train went on to new homes, bringing healing to other families and children in need. The story of Dust and of Clearwater Sanctuary spread beyond Montana, inspiring similar efforts in towns across the country. Rescue organizations shared best practices, volunteers exchanged letters and emails, and a new generation grew up believing that second chances were worth fighting for. Not just for horses, but for people too. As autumn deepened, Ethan and Dust often walked the pastures together at dusk. Sometimes they were joined by a handful of new rescues, sometimes by kids eager to help. And every time Ethan was reminded that hope was not a single act or a single day, but a legacy, something that grew with each small kindness, each act of courage, each moment of shared trust. On the sanctuary gate, a new sign hung. Redemption is a journey, one that heals the rescuer as much as the rescued. Every broken soul deserves a new beginning. And at the bottom, a final message, simple and true. Like, subscribe, and share if you believe in the power of second chances, for horses, for people, for us all.